What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Scary Sundays. And today I want to talk about something that I've been coming up against a lot this week, and that is being in relationship with people that you really care about and not being able to communicate clearly, honestly, and with integrity about how you're feeling or how the dynamic between you and these people is, because there's so much baggage and history built up in the relationships that everybody's first resort is to just become defensive. And I mean, the clear example of this is family, but obviously this happens with friend groups. This can happen at work. Really, I think, in my opinion, the reason this happens is because enough situations have happened where things were not said, like a person's needs were not met, and that wasn't voiced in a clear and responsible, non-accusatory way by that person. And so resentment starts to build, and then it becomes very difficult to communicate clearly. And there's a lot of passive aggressive communication going on, or just things that aren't being said because nobody is just honestly saying what they're feeling. And I'm sure that, if you're watching this, you guys can relate. This is a very common thing because I think as humans, we don't like confrontation because, well, first of all, it's just uncomfortable, but also it can be very difficult to hear feedback about us without becoming defensive, without taking it as if it's an attack. And that can be very difficult because of our ego, but I think it's also can be very difficult to accept that feedback, to receive that feedback, because oftentimes the person delivering that feedback doesn't know or isn't skilled at communicating it in a way that doesn't come across as an attack, isn't able to communicate in a way where they're still taking full responsibility for the fact that it's their response, like it's still their responsibility how they feel about it. And I just think that that's because that's just not a skill that's taught to us. Like, we're not taught how to communicate in in agreeable ways that don't create more defensiveness. And there's a great book on this called Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg, I believe, that honestly I feel like every kid in kindergarten should read. Like, it's kind of astounding that we're not taught that. But anyway, this is not a cultural or socio-political commentary. The reason I want to talk about this is because just to reflect that this is something that I've been coming up against a lot, and it creates this kind of like stone wall feeling, like this energetic block between you and the other person where nobody feels free enough to communicate honestly how they're feeling about the situation. And that's the key, how they're feeling, not pointing fingers or trying to create some objective truth that the other person is wrong or right. But people don't feel free enough because there isn't a culture in that relationship built up of honest, non-accusatory conversation. And there isn't a trust that both sides in that relationship have the same intention, which is to create more love and closeness and connection. And when there isn't that trust, then when somebody says, hey, when you did this, it made me feel this way, instead of that being received as, oh, okay, cool, that's good feedback for me to take in, and that's coming from a place of wanting to get closer, oftentimes that's feedback can be received as an attack and cause the person receiving it to become defensive. So, I think throughout this conversation, throughout this talk, I've been sort of peppering in my own ideas of how you can prevent these types of relationships from forming. And the pernicious thing is that the more time that goes by, the more years that goes by, right, without this being addressed and without both sides having the willingness and the humility to learn a new style of communicating and to commit to a greater joint goal than just keeping each other's egos intact, the harder it becomes, because there's just more and more baggage that isn't being addressed being layered on top. And I think this is like the case with so many families, or just any relationship that has gone on for a long time, where people have not had this relentless commitment to honestly communicating when their heart is closing down, and doing it in a way where they're taking responsibility. But the last thing I'll say that I want to offer as a solution, a potential solution that I've been trying to employ, is first of all, looking within at myself and seeing when I'm not following this advice myself, because I certainly don't follow it all the time. And before pointing the finger at others and getting on my spiritual high horse and saying, well, none of these people do this, making sure that I'm walking the talk and communicating honestly, even if it's causing me to take arrows in my back because the other people in the situation are not committed yet to communicating in the same way. But the other thing that I try to employ is just total and radical compassion for everyone in the situation. Because ultimately, you know, especially in a situation like with family, if people are getting defensive, if people are not able to receive feedback, even when it's being delivered in a non-accusatory way, ultimately, like, there's hurt underneath that, right? There's pain underneath that. There's unaddressed pain. Maybe that person has not felt acknowledged by you or someone else in their life, or by themselves, which is ultimately what it always boils down to. And so, you know, instead of keeping the defensiveness ping pong match going and one person gets defensive and the other person gets defensive, it just goes on forever, just employing radical compassion. First for oneself, for trying your best, and then, of course, for the person who's getting defensive. And this is a deep, difficult practice, especially when you're dealing with your own baggage and shit that you're trying to, you know, be on top of. But this is something that I'm trying to do more and more. And yeah, for anybody that can relate, leave in the comments, like, your thoughts on this. If you have any other ideas about how to deal with this. And if you're interested in learning more about that book that I mentioned, Nonviolent Communication, which I honestly feel like every single human being should read, check it out. I think it's by Marshall Rosenberg, like I said earlier. So that's the Scary Sunday for today. Love you guys. Have a great week. I'll see you next Sunday. Peace.